Hi everyone, welcome to Off the Podium. My guest today is Frances Wilson and she'll introduce herself.
Hello, I'm Frances Wilson. I'm a London-based pianist, piano teacher, concert reviewer and blogger on music and pianism as the Cross-Eyed Pianist.
Thanks for joining me, Frances. Let's just start with your career, your background in music. I read about you and I know it's interesting history there and how you came to teaching, but let's go to your career, your start in music, your musical education background and all of that.
Okay, well, what quite a few people find surprising when they meet me is that I don't actually have a formal qualification in terms of a bachelor degree in music. I didn't go to music college, and nor did I study music at university. In fact, I studied Anglo-Saxon. I wanted to go to music college, but I was discouraged by a music teacher at school. This is back in the early 80s when teachers kind of said things that they perhaps shouldn't have done, sort of comment that I wouldn't dream of making to a student or young person who was interested in pursuing a career in music now. So initially my career post-university was quite different, but I had grown up in a house full of music. My parents were avid concert goers. We lived in Birmingham in the West Midlands in the 1970s when Simon Rattle, Sir Simon as he is now, was a rookie conductor at the CBSO, the City of Birmingham Symphony Orchestra. And that was kind of where my musical grounding and landscape really developed, because my parents took me to concerts from when I was a very young child. In addition, there was always music in the house. It was either on the radio or on LP. My father was a very fine amateur clarinetist who played in a local orchestra and ensemble. And I think from about the age of 5, I started to learn the piano. And I don't remember sort of saying, please may I learn the piano. It just kind of happened, and it kind of suited me and still does very much. So I did all my grade exams, and I cared very passionately about it as a teenager, obsessively almost. It became like a kind of companion and a place to go to create stories and have sort of special time alone with the music. So it was always there. But as I said, I took a slightly different career path from university and worked for 10 years in art and academic publishing, and I really didn't touch the piano for 15 years post-graduation. I was busy doing other things, working, starting a family. And then when my son was about 5, I began to sort of think, actually, I should start playing again because it was such an important part of my life. And I wanted something to do at home so that I could be around for him rather than be out working in an office or something. So someone at the school gate said, oh, you play the piano, don't you? You can teach my daughter. And up until that point, I had no formal training as a teacher, but what I did want to do was give children and young people the opportunity to enjoy music in the way that I had, even in a very small way, but just to give them that opportunity. So that's how I started teaching. And I've been teaching for just over 10 years now, and it's been a very interesting, not always easy, but largely very rewarding experience. And I've kind of learned on the job, which I have to say I think is one of the best ways of learning how to do something like that. As for the blog, that started 7 years ago this summer. And like most of the things that I do, it kind of was something that I thought up late one night. I was trying to find another way of kind of exploring music and my response to it. And I just thought, I need to write about playing the piano because I'd started playing seriously again, and I just wanted a way of recording my thoughts and feelings about playing the piano, the kind of music I was learning again, music I was revisiting, which I'd learnt as a teenager, and also talking about the concerts that I'd started to go to, kind of very sort of early concert reviewing as well. So it became a kind of practice diary where I wrote my thoughts and feelings. And at the outset, and I think probably everybody that writes a blog sort of feels this, it's like, I'm not sure anyone's going to read it, but it kind of doesn't matter, I'm just going to put it out there. And gradually it just developed to where it is now, where in 2015 it was ranked 3rd in the top 10 of British classical music blogs, which was a real accolade and actually something that completely surprised me. And it's been brilliant because it's put me in touch with so many fascinating people, not just through the interview series that I run, the Meet the Artist series, but generally. And it's led to me writing for an international concert, well, several international classical music and concert sites as a reviewer and a writer. And I just feel that all these things that I do kind of feed back on one another. It's like a continuous loop.
Yeah.
Exploring music and enjoying music and encouraging others to explore and enjoy music. And that's kind of where I am now. And I feel like I finally arrived at the age of 50 at the place where I want to be musically. So that's kind of where I am.
The blogs I went through quite a few of them in preparation for today, although I prepare these questions and then conversation leads to other places for the most part. But I found your blogs very easy to read. It had a very natural flow, and I really enjoyed reading quite a few of them. So how do you approach these? How do you pick the concerts that you go to, for example? How do you pick the artists that you want to speak with? What's the process that you go through for these blogs?
Okay, well, it's kind of always evolving, because I think one of the things that I think is very important about blogging is to be able to update content. I don't really like the word content, but it is how we talk about what's on the site. It's one of those very sort of now words, but I think it's important that the site is regularly updated and that the content is varied and interesting. So I tend not to have, I mean, the main focus obviously is pianism and piano, but I cover other things. It's quite random. Ideas come from conversations with people, people's posts on Facebook, other articles I've read, things that interest me that I want to respond to. I offer more personal musings on repertoire. I offer articles exploring certain aspects of playing the piano in a which I hope are supportive to other pianists, especially adult amateur pianists. I've been involved with a group of adult amateur pianists for the last 4 years. It's something which I co-founded, and I think supporting adult pianists is really important because you know they're doing it for very special and personal reasons. It's different to the professional world, but it's still interesting. In terms of the concert reviewing, I pick concerts largely based on repertoire, not artist.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Because I do have some favourite performers, and there are certain people who I will always try and hear if they're in London. One of them who was in London last month was Maurizio Pollini. And despite what some people have said about him in the light of his recent London concert, I still think he's a very, very fine, interesting artist. And I think he does something very special to music. It's quite hard to explain, actually. But largely, I will pick a concert to review based on repertoire. And I'm trying more and more to go and hear repertoire that I don't know. I have very firm views about certain works, especially piano music by Beethoven and Schubert, who are my kind of top two composers as a pianist. And going to hear work I know well, I've discovered, makes me hypercritical, because I sit there thinking, I don't like what you're doing there, I don't agree with that. So I'm trying not to do that. This coming year, my concert going has been much more varied. I've tried to select music that I don't know so well. I'm also keen to hear new music, because I think it's important to keep one's ears open, actually. As I said just now, it all feeds back. So I just like going to concerts, actually, to be quite frank. I love live music. I'd much rather be in a concert listening to a live performance than listening on a streaming service or on disc or even on LP. And so it's the excitement of the live performance as much as anything else which drives me to go. And that's really the motivation for going to concerts, just that buzz that comes from live performance.
I was going to ask about balancing the positive and negative reviews, or having some positive and negative thoughts in your review. How do you balance that? Do you have anything negative to say about some of the artists that you review? Because I've spoken to quite a few young bloggers, and that's one thing that they told me that they have a hard time with, because sometimes they go to concerts and they're in the same city as the performers, so they don't want to say too many negative things, but at the same time they found some things that bothered them, so they want to speak about it, but they're having a hard time expressing it on paper. So how do you do this for young bloggers out there who are having a hard time with it? Give them some suggestions.
I think it is a very difficult balancing act, and it's something that comes up all the time when talking about concert reviews. I'd like to quote from Peter Donohoe, who's a very leading international concert pianist, British pianist, who's been very, very supportive of my blog and my reviewing activities. And he made a comment some years ago that journalists, promoters, concert artists, we should all be on the same side, that of the music. And that's really my philosophy as a reviewer. I personally don't find it helpful to slate performers in the public forum of a review or a blog article. Although I'm a pianist myself, I understand, the processes, the amount of effort that goes into producing a concert. I mean, a lot of people, I think, don't understand the huge amount of effort that goes on, quietly in a practice room for weeks and months and sometimes years in order to then go on stage at the Wigmore or the Carnegie Hall and play for an hour and a half. So I'm very sympathetic to that process prior to the performance. And therefore, I feel that one has to be very careful about appearing to tell concert artists how to do their job. I just don't think it's helpful. I know from conversations with concert pianists whom I've reviewed, a number have said to me that they value what I say because they know that I understand the process.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, a review, and especially a review on a personal blog, this is separate from reviews in newspapers and journals, respected journals like the New York Times or the Guardian or something in the UK. On a personal blog, it is very much about taste. And I think the important thing to remember in that respect is that one's experience of music is very personal and very subjective. So I have been to concerts where I have not liked what the pianist has done to certain pieces or not really engaged or enjoyed what they've done in concert. And yet all around me people are bravoing and sometimes on their feet giving a standing ovation. So they enjoyed it. Who am I to say that was a bad concert? And actually I again, this is a comment from Peter Donohoe, I don't believe that there is such a thing as a bad concert. I've been to eccentric concerts. Ivo Pogorelic in London in 2015 was one of the most eccentric concerts I've ever been to for all sorts of reasons. But it was also one of the most memorable because of the eccentricities and also because amidst all this very strange playing, suddenly in the second half there was playing of extraordinary beauty and profundity and proof that he, like Paolini, he is still a great artist. Yeah. And at the end of the concert, people were on their feet, so it was people there enjoyed it. And fundamentally, again, to me, it's about gaining pleasure from the experience of a concert. I think too much negativism is not helpful. And although some artists say, well, I never read reviews and I just, ignore negative reviews, I think some can be very hurtful, and I just don't think it's useful. I feel as a reviewer, one should be supporting. We have a responsibility to support concert artists and to try and be at least constructive, if not always positive.
Going back to the education and teaching, I found many of your, as I said before, articles very interesting. And if you can talk about your experiences with your teachers and how it led you to form your own teaching style. And this is kind of a general question based on many of the articles I read, because from the parent-student relationship to the graded exams and all these different articles that I came across, very interesting things. And if you could just kind of generally talk about your approach to teaching music, whether it's to young students or adults.
Okay. Well, as I said, I have no formal training other than a very inquisitive and I hope creative approach. one of the things that I decided when I first started was that my piano lessons would not be like the ones I endured as a young child back in the early 1970s with an old lady and a huge Steinway. Very, very boring lessons. I mean, I'm amazed actually looking back that I got to grade 5 and suddenly a door opened and I was able to do more playing independently of a teacher. But I remember being bored an awful lot of the time when I was at those piano lessons. And I decided that I was never going to allow children to be bored, because I think boredom is a terrible, terrible thing. It's just, it can kill enthusiasm.
Yeah.
I was very fortunate that when I was, I think about 10 or 11, my family moved to Birmingham, and I then started with a new teacher who was much more dynamic and energetic, and it was she that taught me to love Beethoven and Bach and opened a door on music. And also I had the facility by then. I think when you get to about grade 5, if you've been taught well, and I was taught well as a young child, you then have the confidence to become more independent.
Yeah.
So I started out teaching beginners and teaching very young children. I mean, sort of kids of 5, 6, 7. And so it always had to be enjoyable. That was my main focus. If they weren't enjoying themselves, I didn't want them to be sort of thrashing through pieces that they were finding difficult or just not enjoying. So the pleasure element is very important, and that really is my main teaching philosophy, because if you're not getting enjoyment from it, why are you doing it? In terms of grade exams, they are a funny thing. I did them all, and I didn't question why I was doing them, to be quite honest. They were just there and they were done, and I was kind of on a treadmill until I got to grade 8. And then it was done, and it felt like it was finished, and very strange really looking back. What I do find, and this kind of ties in with the article in The Guardian that caused the furore recently, and it has kind of led to this conversation today, that there certainly is an attitude, and it's very, very obvious where I live, which is in an affluent part of southwest London, that children, and particularly their parents, are keen to see obvious benchmarks of progress, and graded music exams are the most obvious benchmark of progress. So a lot of the kids want to do exams, or their parents want them to do exams, but what has been very interesting to me, and I come to the way music's taught in our state schools really just from the periphery. I feel that I'm talking with not very much knowledge. It's just based on my observations of my students and my conversations with them. And of course my son has been through, he's now left school, but he went through the state system. Our schools are becoming very anti-competitive. Everything's dumbed down. It's become very kind of equal. Sports day is no longer about winning. Everyone's a winner at sports day at school. And I think that kids actually naturally are quite competitive, and they like a challenge. And I offer them the option of doing exams. Nobody is forced to do a grade exam in my piano studio. It's very much what the student wants. And now that I teach teenagers, they're much more clear about what they want. Most of them want to do the grade exams. They see them as useful benchmarks. They like the focus that preparing for a grade exam gives them. They like the repertoire. And if that's what they want to do, I'm more than happy to support them.
Well, another article, which if you want to talk about briefly, is the Dispelling the Myth of Difficult.
Oh yes, yeah.
For the listener who hasn't read it, some.
So this was my second article in response to Charlotte Gill's piece in The Guardian about notation and elitism of notation. And I felt that one of the sort of underlying suggestions of that Guardian article was that children and young people, and indeed anybody that it chooses to take music lessons, whether privately or in school or college, perhaps as an adult learner, for example, being told that something's difficult before you've begun the process or the task is immediately setting up a negative attitude to it. So I don't use the word difficult in my teaching because I find it's a block. And I nearly did this morning when I was teaching, and I stopped myself. Challenging is better because it suggests something that's possible. And it's true that there is no such thing as difficult. It's about sitting down with the music and spending time. This is what I did with a student this morning. We unpacked a piece of music, in effect. We took it apart and looked at different elements, and then we put it all back together again. And for the student, that meant that they had a toolkit with which to practice the piece for the next week or so. So I think the thing about the word difficult, it really is, as I said in my piece, it's about changing the vocabulary. And I think that's incredibly important in teaching generally, using the right kind of vocabulary. My approach is generally very positive. My husband, who works from home like I do, hears me teaching from his upstairs office, and sometimes he says to me, I can hear you bigging them up. And I have a kind of like a sort of sports coach sometimes approach, especially when they're getting ready for an exam. But it works. It seems to work. And what I'm trying to do is to encourage a positive mindset in the students, to get them to turn. Another article actually is entitled "Turning I Can't into I Can," and it is just really about changing the vocabulary and approaching obstacles and challenges with a more positive mindset. It works for me, and my teaching is entirely based on my own experiences as a pianist. I've studied with 2 master teachers in the last 8 years, and have independently of music college taken 2 performance diplomas. So I've had the experience of working at a very high level with highly skilled teachers and concert pianists, and this has really informed the way I approach my teaching. And both of them have been incredibly positive. They use very positive vocabulary in their teaching, and it makes a huge difference. It makes the student feel encouraged and supported, and if you feel like that, you will go home and do your practicing. It sounds simplistic, but it really does work.
I do believe in it. Again, this is a subject I've spoken about with others off the record, of course, but there are people out there who say always positive doesn't build you up to be a great artist. Of course, it helps you love music and hopefully give back to music. Hopefully, when you get older, attend some of these concerts. But all these positive things doesn't make you a great artist like some of the great artists that we have today. What do you have to say about that?
Well, I know that there is, and it's a somewhat old-fashioned approach now, of which was prevalent in the conservatoires, of basically beating the students down and then building them up again, and sometimes very grudgingly. And I'm very, I'm very distressed to hear that people have been taught like that. Some students continue to be. Now, some people seem to quite like that rather masochistic approach. I just don't think it's helpful. And I think it fosters an idea that these conservatoires and music colleges are places where people go to be treated like that. And I just think it's a great pity, and it is not, in my opinion, the way that we should be teaching any subject. It seems very specific to music. There is a way of giving negative feedback, and one has to. I mean, if a student comes and they're doing something that is either technically or physically wrong or harmful or musically wrong, and when I talk about musically wrong, I'm talking about things like playing tastefully in terms of, for example, making sure that there's an awareness of the style or idiom or particular period of the music. So there is a way of giving negative feedback, but it's about just using the right kind of vocabulary, and it can be done in a positive way without it feeling overly positive, if that makes sense. I kind of do a sort of positive sandwich when I'm giving feedback. So when the students play, the first thing I will do is find something to praise, and even if inside I'm thinking, gosh, that was really very poor, I will find something useful and positive to say. And then the student feels supported, and then one can then say, but maybe we could think about looking at this section and just adjusting this or something. It's possible to do it without making them feel totally, cut down. building self-esteem and confidence is incredibly important, and it's something that I learned very quickly, having come back to the piano after a long absence. And my first teacher as an adult was very gentle and supportive, and very quickly picked up on my anxiety and my lack of confidence, and she set the foundations in place that I could then build on that to where I am now, where I am confident about giving concerts because I know how to prepare. So I don't think that destroying people's confidence or self-esteem is very helpful, and I don't believe that you have to have that done to you to become a great artist. I really don't, and I think the attitude is shifting now, thank goodness, and there's a lot more kindness in teaching in conservatoires.
The next thing that comes to mind is another article again, and I just had such a great time reading your articles. I'm a fan.
Thank you.
Teaching students to teach themselves.
Oh yes. Well, this is another aspect which I think is very interesting, and I think it actually ties in with teaching in conservatoire as well, which I'll come to in a moment. And this is just my opinion. So I remember having a conversation with a student a while ago, and I think I said something to him like, "What do you want to get from your piano lessons?" Because I'm interested in why they're coming, and I'm pleased to say that all of my students now come to their lessons because they want to learn to play the piano. They're not being forced or pushed by parents. And he said, "I want to be able to sit down at the piano and play anything." And I thought, yeah, that's exactly the kind of attitude I'm trying to encourage. And I would feel it was a triumph and a success if a student actually stopped having lessons with me because he or she felt that they had enough in their musical toolkit, shall we say, to go away and work independently. And that, again, is to do with confidence. So when I teach, a lot of what I'm doing is teaching them how to practice, actually. I think 90% of teaching is about teaching how to practice successfully and productively and intelligently. So if I'm giving them the wherewithal to practice independently, I'm making them independent learners. And I do things like encourage them. I ask questions a lot in lessons. Why do you think the composer has done this? What does this mean? What do you take from this section? Some of them are very nervous about responding to things like this, and I think this goes back to what's happening in schools where they are not being encouraged to question their teachers. And that's really sad. I'm very lucky because, again, my students are bright kids who enjoy that kind of interaction. So I want them to ask me questions too. It's a two-way thing. So I teach them how to practice, and I teach them how to self-evaluate and to be self-critical in the best possible way. And that's what being an independent learner is about for me. And having the confidence to try a piece of music without the teacher going through it with them. One of my students came back after Christmas, not this last Christmas, but the previous Christmas holiday, and she was a bit sheepish when she came in, and I asked her how she was, and she said, "Oh, I've learnt a new piece. I hope you don't mind." And I said, "No, of course I don't mind. What is it?" And she played Debussy's Clair de Lune, and I was so astonished and delighted that I actually had to go in the kitchen because I couldn't stop crying at the wonder of this, that this student had done it on her own. And she then apologised to me for having learnt a piece that I hadn't assigned to her. And I said, "Don't apologise." I said, "That was absolutely wonderful that you went away and you did that on your own without me. You don't need me."
Yep.
No, I want them to feel they can do that. That's a wonderful thing, because they learn more exploring the music on their own, and they can come to me. They know they can come to me, and we can check things together. They can ask me questions. They can, if there's something that's bothering them, we can go through it together. But to do that is opening another door into this extraordinary world of music, and the exploration is wonderful, and that's what I want them to be doing.
It's very inspirational to hear this from you, because you haven't had that, as you said, the formal training, and for many years you had another job, and you come into a field and you so naturally have the ability to teach. And as I said before about the blogs, such a natural flow to the blogs. It's really it's addicting to read those. I just kept read as soon as I started, I would just click to the next and go on and read them. It was really great. You wanted to speak a little bit about the conservatories. Do you want to do that now? And
Oh
teaching at
yes,
the
talking
conservatories?
about independent, being independent learners. So this was something I'm looking in on the sidelines, really, and it's just observing teachers, certain teachers at work, talking to students, talking to people who've been through the system at the same time when I was at university, which was in the early 80s, and things are very different now. But I have detected a certain egocentricity amongst some teachers whereby they really don't want to let go of their students because it kind of massages their ego to see their students clinging to them.
Yeah.
And also trying to turn out students that are kind of in their image but not as good as them.
Yeah.
Which I think is also very sad. We want to give them an individual, personal voice. Another quote from a British pianist who I much admire and privileged to have a friendly relationship with is Stephen Huff. And he said once in one of his blogs that he would be very troubled if he walked down the corridor in a conservatoire and he heard students who all sounded like their teacher. And that I feel is where a teacher's ego is getting in the way. And I'm not that kind of a teacher. My ego is very carefully packed away when I'm teaching. I want to encourage students to find their own voice, and it doesn't matter whether they're advanced or intermediate or beginners, but finding their own voice in their music is so important.
Yeah.
And it gives them a sense of ownership of the music, making it their own, which is also incredibly important.
Another thing that comes to mind is the parent-student relationship and how that should be. What do you see? What do you see positives with a parent-student relationship, and what are some negatives that you've seen throughout your career so far?
Well, parents are very important because students come for a lesson once a week, and in that time between lessons they have to go and practice independently. Now I can give them, as I said before, as many tools as possible to enable them to practice and progress independently between lessons, but particularly with younger children one relies on parents being able to support them. Now this doesn't mean that the parents have to be musicians or musically inclined or able to read music, any of those things. Sometimes it is simply having somebody sit in the room when the child is practicing and make encouraging noises. So it is very important. I've had frustrating encounters with parents. There was one who used to reteach the child between lessons. So this poor kid was confused because he didn't know whether he should be following what mum told him or what teacher told him. And that was very difficult for me. I am generally a very easygoing person and I don't like having to confront parents about things like this. But now and then you just have to sort of say to them, it's not helpful. And again, one finds the right vocabulary to do that so you don't offend people.
Yeah.
So I try and encourage the parents to be involved, and I also do that in another way. We have concerts usually once a year where the parents and friends and family can come and hear the children playing, and everybody then has a chance to hear each other playing, appreciate different repertoire, and just sort of experience live music and the pleasure of music. So that's how my relationship with the parents and the students' relationship with their parents kind of works. I have to say that at the moment it's very easy because I'm teaching kids who are aged between 13 and 17. They're all very self-motivated. They've got lovely parents who support them. I don't really have any complaints in that department anymore. But I've had issues in the past, and I've now sorted my studio in such a way that I don't have to have those issues.
It's been great speaking with you. Now it's something off of music. It's not related to music so much. What do you do outside of music? This is always interesting to ask musicians because their schedule is so packed with all things musical that they forget to have their own personal time or hobbies outside of music. Do you do anything outside of music?
It's difficult, actually. I mean, so much of I would say that music is my life. I know it sounds like a cliche, but everything I do seems to be oriented towards that. But my other great passion is cooking. And in fact, before I started my Cross-Eyed Pianist blog, I had another food blog called The Demon Cook, which is kind of where I learned how to be a blogger.
Mm-hmm.
And I find cooking very therapeutic, actually. If I've been practicing or playing or teaching, to go and stir risotto or make food is a very therapeutic activity. And it just kind of, it uses different bits of the mind and body, but it feels sort of complementary in a strange way. And writing, I mean, I write about music, but writing as an activity is something that I've always done, as from a young child, writing stories and poems to now with the blog. I've always enjoyed putting words down, and I've kind of got to, a wonderful place where I can write about music. It just seems perfect, actually.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's been great speaking with you about all of this. Do you have anything that we've missed that you want to talk about?
I would just like to touch on the Charlotte Gill article, if I may.
Yeah, go ahead.
And responses to that, because that's really what sort of led us to
Of course, yeah, it all sort of led us here.
There were a couple of things, we've all responded to it, and Ian Pace's response and the number of people that he got as signatories to his open letter is remarkable and wonderful, and it shows how much people care.
Yeah.
And I think that's very important. But what I felt in the intervening weeks and reading many more articles directly in relation to that first article in The Guardian, and also sort of more subsidiary articles, it set me thinking about one or two things that trouble me, beyond the most obvious thing that troubled us in that Guardian article about notation being an elitist sort of exclusive activity, or is just this sort of general suspicion of knowledge and anti-intellectualism that seems to pervade our society now. It's like people who are expert at something are considered with suspicion, and I think that's a great shame. I think we need experts. We need experts in music just as much as we need experts in medicine or physics. We can't all be sort of trundling along through society on one level. I just think that's unhealthy. And I just found that suggestion in that article that dumbing down the way we teach music specifically very offensive, because we teach in the UK, certainly we teach English now in primary school in a way which could be deemed cryptic. I mean, the kind of things that young children are being asked to understand and grasp in English tuition is absolutely ridiculous, in my opinion. Nobody's jumping up and down and saying that that's elitist.
Yeah.
We teach quite complex maths, we teach coding in our schools. None of those things are deemed elitist. So this leads me on to the other thing, which I think was an underlying suggestion in that article, is that because notation is most closely associated with classical music, we come back to that old bugbear of classical music is elitist. And I think that's the inference, the underlying inference. And I have a real problem with that. It's an ongoing issue. It seems to not be able to go, it's not going away. However much those of us in the profession try, we are stuck with this awful tag that we are elitist and snobby, and that the art form is inaccessible. And that troubles me, because another of my sort of stated aims in life is making music available to everybody. Nobody should be denied the opportunity to study music, learn music, go to hear a concert, listen to music. I want it to be for everybody. It sounds romantic, but if we don't have romantic notions like that, I think society is failing.
Yeah.
Also, certainly in school, and I speak from personal experience. My son is dyslexic, and he struggled at primary school and at senior school. Now, for children who have special educational needs like dyslexia and more serious special educational needs, music and art and drama can provide them with a wonderful outlet, and it's a place where they can perhaps excel. In my son's case, it was cooking, and he's now embarking on a professional career as a chef.
Wow.
But for other children, art, music, drama can be a place where they can excel where they may not be excelling academically in maths or English or science, for example. And therefore, I think it's so important that these subjects are retained in our national curriculum. The other thing that bothers me is that music is regarded as a soft subject, an easy subject. When I studied music at school, and I took O and A levels, I found music the most difficult subject.
Yeah.
It's not all. It is complex. It's mathematical. It has its own rules, which one has to learn. And once grasped, they're there for life. That's for sure. I mean, I refer back to my A-level studies in my teaching today. I've never thought it was a soft subject, and I think it's offensive again to describe it in those terms.
Yeah.
And the kind of criticisms that are made at music, and specifically at classical music, I think are coming from people who really don't have a proper concept of what is involved.
Yeah.
It kind of goes back to what I said earlier about the amount of preparation that's involved in getting ready for a concert.
Mm-hmm.
I have a quote from the mother of a former boyfriend of mine who said once of a concert pianist who was a neighbour of hers, she said, "He can't be any good, he's always practicing." Which totally misunderstands, why the why and the how of what a concert artist does. So this idea that we just sit at the piano or whatever and the thing comes out of the fingers we need to dispel that too.
Yeah.
Just to finish off, to talk about the word elite and elitist, as you well know, those of us who work in the profession are not elite. We're not members of an elite in the sort of common current understanding of the word elite.
Mm-hmm.
We are generally ordinary people who have ordinary lives and families and mortgages to pay and cars to service. We don't live in ivory towers or gilded cages, and I think that people outside the profession need to come and meet us and come and hear us at work to understand better what we do and to realise that we are approachable and normal. We just are very privileged to work with this wonderful art form.
Yeah.
And I kind of think that's a good place to end.
When you were talking about all of this, quite a few questions came to mind, but we'll leave that for another time because I would love to talk to you more about all of these topics. But it was great getting to know you. As I said before, I am very much inspired by your blog and how well you write and the amount of work you do. And I encourage everyone to check that out. And I know you have quite a few different blogs and other blogs that you're a part of, and I'll make sure to put those in the description of the video, unless you want to say those now.
Thank you. Well, the main one, just to plug it, is of course the Cross-Eyed Pianist, which is www.crosseyeedpianist, all one word, .com. And then that will lead to other places where I write. And you can follow me on Twitter to hear me rambling on.
I like that as well, actually. You're very active. It's great to see that. Well, thank you so much for joining me. It was great speaking with you, and I hope to have you back sometime to talk more about music.
It's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you very much for having me. I've really enjoyed it.